Hello everyone, my name is Nicole Fegan, and I have seen quite a few movies in my time. Most of them you've probably heard of and maybe even seen, but hopefully some of them you haven't heard of or seen. Based on the title of this video, you can tell this is going to be me talking about the best movies you haven't heard of. Maybe you haven't heard of. Obviously, disclaimer, you've maybe probably heard of some, maybe even all of these, but the metric I was using was just the views on letterboxd, so these are films that I have liked, I've rated 3.5 stars or above, that have 10,000 or fewer views on letterboxd. So I'm gonna do these in order of the least popular to most popular. So first we have No Way Out, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. This was released in 1950 and it has 2.4 thousand views on letterboxd. This is a film noir starring Sidney Poitier. This is, I believe, his first major lead role. And in it he plays the only black doctor at a city hospital, and he has to tend to these two racist white men as they are both shot in the leg. He ends up performing a procedure on one of them and the man doesn't survive, and the brother, the other white man, accuses Sidney Poitier's character of intentionally killing him. Quite a few of the films on this list I ended up watching for college classes. There was, I think, like 4 of the films on this list I watched for this class on Hollywood and American modernism. This is one we watched for that, so like we viewed it through a very like cultural, political lens, and I think for its time it is like so groundbreaking, and it especially holds up now. It's certainly not a perfect film, it doesn't get everything right, but I think its explorations of racism in this town and in the hospital are really interesting, and Sidney Poitier's performance is like amazing. You can see how he became such a massive star. Also, I'm getting over like a week-long cold, so I'm sorry if I sound congested or I'm coughing a little bit during this. It's just what my body's going through, so thank you for dealing with that. Up next we have The Clowns, directed by Federico Fellini. This was released in 1970 and has 3,000 views on letterboxd. So my boyfriend actually took a class on Fellini. This wasn't a class I took, and he watched like pretty much all of his major films, and then after he did that I watched most of his major films, and this was one of those. This is Fellini's love letter to the art of clowning. Fellini is really interested in the circus and in clowns. I feel like this crops up in a lot of his films, and this deals with that, I think, the most directly. The film follows Fellini trying to make a film about clowns. There are scenes with him interviewing real-life clowns and just like talking about this notion of like, where has the clown gone? It's often touted as like the first mockumentary, though I don't know, I feel like using that term for this feels a little odd because like it wasn't intentionally trying to be a mockumentary. But it's very interesting to watch now, I think, because I am someone who does not have a massive affinity for the art or act of clowning. It's almost to the point where I feel bad because Fellini is so enamored of this thing, and he's so sad that it's drifting away, and I am like the furthest product of it drifting away, because like I feel like our society doesn't view clowning as an art form or anything anymore. The final scene is easily my favorite part of this film, without really spoiling anything. They do like a recreation of something for someone who used to be a clown, and like it's like a 10-minute sequence of just being fully immersed in this joy and sorrow of this time long gone, and it's just like so well done. I especially think it's a great watch if you're already interested in Fellini's other films, because I think it really dives deep into Fellini's interest in the topics he explores in other films, so I highly recommend it. Up next we have Ghost, directed by Takashi Ito. This was released in 1984 and has 4.9 thousand views on letterboxd. I talked about this, I think, in a recent video, just like one of my like what I watched this month videos, but this is an experimental short horror film. There's like no dialogue, it's just like the camera. It's neon and horrifying and like 8 minutes long and so visceral. I don't even totally remember what building you're going through. I just remember like the camera follows you shakily and disjointedly through this neon building that has all of these ghostly vibes to it. I wrote in my notes that it's the coolest thing of all time, and I wish I could give you like more story beats, but obviously it's more of an experience than anything I'm gonna have any kind of like story type analysis for, but I think you can find it on like YouTube or Vimeo is where I was able to catch it, so if you've got like literally like 10 minutes, go watch this, it's awesome. Up next we have Ulysses Gaze, directed by Theo Angelopoulos. totally butchered that name, I'm sure. This was released in 1995 and has 5.4 thousand views on Letterboxd. This I also watched for a college class. This was a class about the Odyssey in film and literature. We read the Odyssey, we read some of Ulysses, what did we do? We watched Our Brother, We're Out There, yada yada, and we watched this film. This is about a Greek filmmaker who's played by Harvey Keitel, who is on a search for the lost reels by the Menaki brothers, who are like important Balkan artists, filmmakers. It is this very long film that just follows this filmmaker named A on his journey across the Balkans to find these films. What I remember most about this, and it's been a few years at this point, is its landscape. It's a very white, gray film to me. I just remember how sparse it is, and like, both visually and in tone, it doesn't just look that way, it really feels that way. Because there's the question of like, is this thing he's looking for, does it exist at all? And like, the filmmaker's aware of that, the watcher's aware of that, and like, it's not like a mystery at all, but you are kind of wondering like, is there an end to this search? And I feel like that creates an emptiness that goes along with just like this very sparse, white, snowy, mountainous atmosphere. It's really good. It's one that I think I watched it on like 1.5 speed at the time because it is very long and I was a college student who just like wanted to get it done for the assignment, but I really want to rewatch it at some point, like properly sit down with it and like fully experience that. I think it's like 3 hours, but if you're up for that, it's an amazing film and I recommend it. Up next we have Destry Rides Again, directed by George Marshall. This was released in 1939 and has 6.5 thousand views. This is a western set in the fictional town of Bottleneck, featuring Jimmy Stewart and Marlene Dietrich. In this town, there's kind of chaos and violence, and Marlene Dietrich plays like this saloon singer, and in comes Jimmy Stewart, this like pacifist hero to the town who's there to like solve their problems in an orderly way. They're all surprised when he doesn't want to like carry a gun, and when he like tries to solve a problem later in the film, he's like, well, if you do this, you're gonna go to jail, instead of just like attacking him. I feel like I'm not talking about this film positively, but it is just like a really endearing and funny western. I also watched this film for that class on Hollywood and American modernism, and I think this one is especially interesting to look at in like a historical lens, because like, why was this interest on this kind of pacifist notion when I feel like so much of westerns is about like bravado and machismo and like the power in asserting violence. The performances in this are great. Jimmy Stewart is pretty much always amazing, and just this combo is like especially electric. So if you're into westerns, somehow missed this one, really recommend it. Up next we have my personal favorite film on this list of 10, and that is Blue, directed by Derek Jarman. This was released in 1993 and it has 7.8 thousand views on Letterboxd. This is a film, but it is probably an experience more than it is a film. This is an unchanging screen of International Klein blue, like that it's just blue. And it is narrated, there are dual narrations about like the color blue, and about Derek Jarman's life as he is living with and dying of AIDS. Part of the point is that complications have caused him to lose some of his sight, so he can only see shades of blue. So the blue is intentional, it's not just like a gimmick. And if you do watch this, or experience it, I really recommend forcing yourself to look at it for the whole time. I think there's the audio on YouTube, and I pulled up a photo of International Klein Blue because I think the rip on YouTube is kind of like a muted down color and I wanted the full experience. And there were times when I found myself shutting my eyes or like not fully actually watching, but when I sat there and was immersed in the narrative and forced myself to have my eyes open, it is just like this absolutely chilling experience. And the narration is beautiful. It's so well written, it's so captivating. I mean, it's obviously heartbreaking, but it's just like so well constructed and narrated. I also appreciate that it like changes what I think of as film or as cinema, because I do consider it a film, even though the camera isn't doing anything. So it's interesting, it's amazing, it's all of these things. If you watch one thing from this video, again, this is my favorite film of the ones I'm talking about. It's more well-known than like, what, the first 5 I talked about or something, but it's truly amazing and life-changing. The next film we have is The Letter, directed by William Wyler. This was released in 1940, and it has 8.1 thousand views on Letterboxd. This is a film noir starring Bette Davis, who at the beginning of the film, you see her kill a man, and she ostensibly killed him because he tried to sleep with her, but suspicions are aroused as to whether that is the real reason or not. The titular letter is discovered that she wrote a letter to the man she killed earlier that morning, asking him to come and see her, and so the whole film is just about figuring out what's going on. This woman has a husband and he's involved in figuring it all out, and it's just very noir and very cool. This movie I also watched for that class on, you guessed it, Hollywood and American Modernism, and in that class one of the things we talked about a lot is that this movie has some pretty blatant yellowface in it. The movie takes place in Singapore, and yeah, just some not great stuff on the production end. I personally wouldn't say that ruined the movie for me. It's just an interesting thing to look at historically, but something to know before going into it if that's something you'd be super uncomfortable with. But the movie itself was so well shot and so well lit. One of the things I remember most is like how well the moon is used as like symbolic thing and also as lighting. Bette Davis is amazing in this, and I think it's another film that is as interesting as like a film as it is as like a piece of history. Next we have The Long Day Closes, directed by Terence Davies. This was released in 1992 and has 8.7 thousand views on Letterboxd. In this film, we follow an 11-year-old boy growing up in Liverpool in the 1950s, and he is so lonely. He gets bullied at school, his friends are just like his family, and we mostly watch him having his escapism at the cinema. This film very much feels like a love letter to cinema, as again, like that's the biggest joy in his life, and I think this film just does a lot with escapism and like with one's own fantasy world and loneliness. Terence Davies is an interesting director to me. The two films of his I've seen really deal with like the working class English people, and I think this one is done a lot better than the other one of his that I can't remember the name of at this point. The last shot of this film stayed with me for a very long time. I remember just like sitting there and like after that final shot happened, just like not knowing what to do for the rest of my night, which is always a sign of a great ending of a film. And just, yeah, if those themes of loneliness and escape and loving film interest you, I would really recommend this. So the least viewed favorite film of mine in this video is Gold Diggers of 1933, directed by Marvin LeRoy, released in 1933, and this has 10,000 views on Letterboxd, so it probably has more than 10,000 because it rounded or whatever, but that's fine. This is the highest of the lowest. This film follows 4 struggling actresses during the Great Depression. All of Broadway is basically closing down, so the show they were working on is closing down. But their neighbor, Brad, is a songwriter and he gets the money to go ahead to make a new show, and they're going to be a part of that. The gold diggers part of this is quite literal. All of these women want to marry wealthy men so that they can have money, and that is a plot point. And the musical numbers in this are amazing. This is like a classic Busby Berkeley flick, a classic picture, if you will. I shouldn't have done that. I'm really sorry. It has like very classic early Hollywood musical pictures written all over it, the like elaborate choreography, which is actually like the musical numbers I think are what I remember most of this. I just have like distinct vivid images of some of the big musical numbers. And Busby Berkeley knew what the fuck he was doing, man. I mean, like, you cannot mess with him. So those first 9 films were like all films you could find on Letterboxd and like see the stats of and the reviews of or whatever, but my final pick is a short film by experimental short filmmaker Paul Clipson, and it is Headache. For those of you who know me might know that Headache by Grouper is my favorite song of all time, and Headache by Paul Clipson is an experimental short film set to Headache by Grouper. I've only seen a couple of Paul Clipson's things, but that seems to be mostly his MO. He takes music and makes short films using them, and the one for Headache is a perfect creation in my eyes. Headache doesn't have like a traditional chorus, but it does have like verses and then like a refrain, and during the verses the camera work is kind of chaotic and very through the trees, and then when the refrain happens you get like these calming shots of the water, which is very on theme for the song Headache. And I think I mean, part of why I love it so much is because I love the song, but I really think the filmmaking of this captures the essence of that song so perfectly. I really want to watch more of Paul Clipson's things. He died, I think, in the past few years, and some of his stuff has been preserved on YouTube or on Vimeo, so I want to check out more of his stuff, and if you are interested in that kind of short music filmmaking, I would really recommend checking him out, and specifically checking Headache out. So those are the 10 best films that I have seen that you have maybe never heard of. If you've already seen any of these and are like, wow, Nicole, that was such a great pick, I love it, let me know in the comments. If you end up watching any of these, let me know. And if you like this type of video, please let me know, because I have already a list for albums that I love that you might have never heard of, which I think I'd have a higher chance of you actually not having heard of them, because I've heard more albums than I've seen films. So if this is a genre of video that interests you, please let me know. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day, and you will see me in the next one.